reason number 33 to get a Nissan. The cold. Because winter isn't done with us yet. Good thing the 2026 Nissan Rogue was built to conquer all conditions. With intelligent all-wheel drive, standard heated front seats, heated steering wheel, and heated mirrors, you can leave the worst of winter out in the cold. Lease the 2026 Nissan Rogue S starting at 0.4% for up to 36 months. Includes a 0.5% loyalty rebate for qualifying Nissan customers. Until March 2nd on approved credit. Conditions apply. Details at Nissan.
All right, people with criminal records doing terrible things, getting outrageously light sentences, at least in my opinion. I got a story came out this week. A repeat offender who ran an online drug store was selling illicit drugs over Instagram and Telegram. His drug network was linked to 2 fatal overdoses of young Montrealers, a 15-year-old and a 19-year-old. This 24-year-old that was running the drug operation got 42 months in prison. And guess what? He was fresh off a 36-month sentence for similar crimes. I find that outrageous. And I got another story that may be even more outrageous from Ontario. Let's bring in Eric Sutton, criminal defense attorney, into this discussion. Eric, thanks for coming back.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I know you're a criminal defense attorney. Maybe you see these light sentences and you say, you know what, it's just fantastic lawyers doing their jobs. But, to me, I question how anyone involved in the drug trade, where there is a link, direct or indirect, that leads to the death of 2 teenagers, and who has a criminal rap sheet, they've already been in jail for similar crimes, how they end up with sentences that can be explained in months, right? Described in months. What do you say, Eric? What's going on here?
Well, let's describe it first in years. It's still 3.5 years in a federal penitentiary. It's not that light. It might be on the lighter end. I agree with you, but remember that the prosecution and defense negotiate often, and a judge generally follows the result of the negotiation that the parties agree, unless the sentence is against public interest. So you have experienced prosecutors who know the background of the accused, who know the facts, and come to an agreement with the defense. And obviously, in this case, both sides felt this was a reasonable sentence. Bear in mind that these unfortunate victims apparently overdosed, and you can't necessarily point your finger at the seller for what the victim has done. You can overdose on prescription drugs. You could be prescribed oxycodone for pain relief and decide to down a whole bottle and die, but the doctor's not responsible. So the only distinction really is that this was an illegal business.
Are judges making that same determination? Like, well, listen, he was dealing illegal drugs, but how can he be responsible for how much they took? A 15-year-old, like a 24-year-old deals to a 15-year-old, and well, he doesn't have responsibility. Of course, that 15-year-old should have used the drugs more responsibly. Like, I find it so unbelievable, Eric.
Well, do we know really all the details? Mm-hmm. For instance, would the seller have known the age of the buyer? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily. This is all done online. I think he was really sentenced as someone who was trafficking drugs illegally, including marijuana, hash, sort of a bit of a illegal drugstore, a dépanneur for drugs, you could say, online. But I still find it it could be seen as a little simplistic to just say, look, 2 people died and we want to impose a harsher sentence. Mm-hmm. People, unfortunately, it's a social problem. People are dying from drug overdoses, and they're procuring them somewhere, either legally or illegally.
The 42 months, will he serve the 40? Like, he gets 42 months. As it stands, federal penitentiary, do they serve all 42 months, or is it like,
no. As a general rule, their worst case scenario is serving 2/3.
Worst case? What's the best case?
The best case, he could be out at 1/3. He could be out at 1/3 because he's got a previous penitentiary term, if I understand correctly. So
he does.
He would likely serve 2/3.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Let's say he does the 2/3. He does 28 months in jail. Okay, just over 2 years. He comes out. He goes right back to dealing drugs. Someone else dies. Back in courts. The third time. What do you think this, like, let's say he does the exact same thing once again. What is sentencing in that scenario in this country?
I think you'd be looking at a pretty heavy sentence. He would be seen as a recidivist who's completely oblivious to respecting the law. I think he'd be looking at a very heavy penitentiary term. But again, he was sentenced as someone who trafficked. He wasn't sentenced as someone. The prosecution acknowledged that they couldn't determine that the person had purchased drugs and had overdosed on drugs, but were the drugs in this person's systems in fact the drugs that had been purchased from this online vendor, or had they come from some other source?
Okay, so I get that.
There are hurdles here for the prosecution.
Totally, and you know what? Let's be honest. Probably in a criminal justice system, you want to make sure that you've got all the evidence and there are no questions, right? Because you could always get things wrong. So I kind of get that. But let me throw another story from Canadian Justice from this week. It comes from Ontario. So there was a man that was involved in an LCBO, the liquor store in Ontario. He helped rob the liquor store, okay? His role, he was the lookout for the getaway vehicle, okay? That getaway vehicle ends up on the 401, driving the wrong way on the 401, and four people were killed, including an infant, okay? So this gentleman, his name is Manpreet Gill, from India, unknown immigration status, does not speak English, by the way, because the trial had to be done with a translator, so does not speak English or French. And again, look out for the getaway vehicle. A toddler, 4 people die. He got 5.5 months, and it should be noted, if he gets 6 months, he gets deported. So the judge gives him 5.5 months. Again, I look at this, Eric, and I say, my goodness, this is just absurd leniency. And I wonder if there's a from the criminal defense standpoint, if there's an explanation for this type of leniency.
Well, look, his lawyer, I think, did a very effective job. I wasn't there, but I tend to think, having read the report, the coverage on the case, that this person was a lookout, and probably his lawyer argued that he had no idea that this was a robbery. He thought it was simply a theft of alcohol, and they were going to steal a bottle of, I don't know, Jack Daniels and drive home. Mm-hmm. He could not necessarily foresee or anticipate that this would turn into a robbery, and that the driver would then drive recklessly, dangerously, and in a criminally negligent fashion with horrible consequences. But was it reasonably foreseeable for him? The answer may well be no. Yeah. So he ended up pleading guilty, the passenger and lookout, to very minor charge. Well, less severe charges, theft under $5,000, which is much like a shoplifting. Any shoplifting is theft under $5,000, and he had breached his conditions, bail conditions. But these are not convictions that would jeopardize his status in Canada.
So
I'm
Eric,
not sure if he's a permanent resident or not.
Let me ask you something here. Do you worry that some of these cases were being so lenient? And we had Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservatives, on. He promised on this show the most aggressive crackdown on crime in our lifetimes. Those were his words, right? Are you worried that these lenient sentences, what will happen? It will lead to the pendulum swinging back, because the public's upset, the politicians are upset, that what we're going to end up with is draconian sentencing because of years and years of sentencing like this?
Well, first of all, I think if you look at this Ontario case fairly, there is an explanation for the sentence. It's true, if it's sentenced to 6 months or more, the person would be liable to lose his status, whatever status he may have in Canada, and could be deported. But so that might have been a factor that the judge considered, and they are supposed to. A judge is supposed to. The Supreme Court case about that. Now, will the pendulum swing back again? It already swung back under Harper, and what we learned was that it doesn't, besides maybe filling up the jails and keeping people off the street a little bit longer, it doesn't really slow down criminality, which is a social problem. It's rarely the laws that criminals or criminally minded people think about when they're committing crimes.
It's so interesting, Eric. Listen, I've got to leave it there, but I've had a guest on this program in the last couple of weeks that has looked at the numbers and said, no, au contraire, crime has been going up, and it's property crime and violent crime. We're now ahead per capita of the U.S. So, I don't know who to believe anymore, but, I've heard both things here.
I don't pretend to be an expert, but I understand statistically that that's not the case. I think the SPVM could give you their data, the Montreal Police. That's not what I understand. And
Eric,
it's not my anecdotal experience.
Eric, listen, appreciate your time. Appreciate your insight always. Thanks so much.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Criminal defense attorney Eric Sutton.